boys, and Fiona, I believe we're still talking about football.
We are, and you're going to stay, and it's very, very clear to all of us that you and Al are highly intelligent of the species of sports journalists, because we're going to be talking a little bit about that, because footballers, they're stereotyped for being quicker on the pitch than off it, but are we being unfair to professional footballers when labelling them as, picking my words carefully, less than bright, maybe is what we'd say? Well, new academic research says that we're being unfair. Before coming on air, I spoke with the academic Leonardo Bonetti from Oxford University, whose research has found footballers have higher problem-solving skills than the normal person on the street, i.e. Martin, you and I. I started by asking him what his study looked like.
We wanted to try to define as much as possible a sort of ideal psychological profile of the elite football player. And to do that, we essentially looked into two different directions. On the one hand, we had cognitive abilities that we wanted to test. And on the other side, we wanted to study personality traits of these elite football players. And for the cognitive abilities, we used a lot of different tests, spanning executive functions, working memory, abilities of solving logical problems, and also planning in general. And we found that these elite football players had much higher cognitive abilities across all of these different tests that we used compared to normal people, compared to control participants. When it comes to personality traits instead, we found a very specific personality set of traits for elite players. Especially, we could see that elite players had much higher level of extraversion compared to controls, and also higher levels of conscientiousness, which might suggest that they were much better able to train very, very strongly and with a lot of self-discipline compared to normal people. They also had lower levels of agreeableness, so they were not necessarily the kindest people in the world, which makes sense because if you think about it, when the competition is very stiff, like in football, you probably need to be a little bit self-oriented in order to emerge and succeed. And then finally, these elite players also had higher levels of openness to experiences, so they were more prone to, well, just listen to whatever happens around them. And they also had lower levels of neuroticism, which makes sense because that means that they were more able to control anxiety, to work well, to perform well under pressure, which obviously is very important for football players where a lot of people watch them all the time.
And it's interesting to see what you think about whether or not the reverse can be true. For example, should people start playing football to improve their brain function? And was it the playing of the football, the problem solving, that increased intelligence?
Oh, that's a very good question. I would say that, in principle, anything that is mentally challenging is a very good idea. It's something that would be recommended in order to improve your brain flexibility and also to potentially become even more clever. But I wouldn't say that football specifically would be the best thing to do here. Football might work, might contribute, but doing something that where there is even more level of mental challenge would be even better. For instance, playing a musical instrument or studying mathematics or coding might be better in that sense. But for sure, football wouldn't harm.
Perhaps there are stereotypes that paint footballers as not the brightest, shall we say. And you're Italian, Leonardo, so it isn't a trope that's limited to the UK. Footballers there too, I understand, are considered not to be the brightest. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, no, you're right. That's actually a stereotype that is present in Italy too, and I guess in most places in the world. And well, it's difficult to really give it a final answer for that, but I think that partially it could be related to their ability of answering questions in interviews. So, for instance, they tend to provide very standardized answers that don't sound necessarily very brilliant, I would say. And I also must say that in this particular study, we were interested in this performance matrix that I mentioned before. And we didn't study verbal intelligence, so the ability of using words to express yourself or to express concepts. So it might also be possible that while football players have this very high level of performance scores or cognitive abilities, perhaps they are not very good when it comes to verbal intelligence. And that might explain partially that. And the other reason could be that these people are often very young and they don't necessarily have higher levels of education, because if you play football, you mostly don't want to engage in a degree program at a university. Perhaps people might confound not being very knowledgeable with being not very much intelligent.
And there's some pretty famous examples of smart footballers off the pitch, aren't there, Leonardo? 'Cause I know you looked at that and you're aware of that as well.
To give you an example, as you mentioned, I'm Italian and I'm a fan of Bologna Football Club. And we had our captain is actually Scottish, is Lewis Ferguson. And I think he's a brilliant example of a player who must be very clever because of how he plays. He's a deep thinker. He's also very much able to keep under control emotions and therefore to play under pressure. And as a matter of fact, he was one of the main reasons of Bologna getting qualified again in Champions League. So I think that's a wonderful example, especially since we are talking here with BBC Scotland, of a great player who made us very much proud in Bologna.
That was Leonardo Bonetti there from Oxford University. Well, let's get more on this with Richard Foster, the former Aberdeen and Rangers footballer, who's now head of coaching at Motherwell Football Club. Richard, thanks for coming on Drive Time. Martin Dowden, my sports wingman, is here with us as well. What did you make of the findings? Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised when they're explained. You know, when the things that they tested, the avenues that they tested, I'm not surprised because, you know, when you're on the football pitch, you are making decisions all of the time. You're constantly having to have an awareness of what's around about you. Some would say that my awareness came and went at times during games, which is fair. But I think when you hear how he's broken it down and what he's tested for, I'm not surprised.
Do you think